Get cool stuff for what you were going to do anyway. Drink beer. With Buy Beer, Get Gear from Labatt, you can just snap a photo of your receipt and upload it to the website to rack up points for exclusive merch. Get points for every purchase, whether you're grabbing a pint on draft, a case for a party, or a tall boy at the stadium. Any size, any product, anywhere you buy Labatt. Buy beer, get gear. Sign up now at rewards.labattusa.com.
This is entertainment. People pay to watch this.
Pass to a cutting Hiltz. He darts in. He scores!
People actually subscribe.
All across central New York.
Time expired! Syracuse has done it!
It's Drive Time with your host, Tim Leonard.
Hey, guess what? I'm getting one. Hey!
We welcome you into Drive Time on a Wednesday afternoon in central New York. Another beautiful day in CNY. We're ready to talk all things college sports after another bill has come forward. Ted Cruz, Maria Cantwell, senators putting forward a bill. That's what my job has come to, talking about senators putting forward a bill and what it means for college athletics and the chances that a bipartisan bill passes. All really fun stuff. We can certainly dive into that today. And what are the big takeaways from a shakeup maybe coming to college sports? Maybe finally the Senate is going to get their hands around this thing. We know the NCAA is not. We know it's really up to that to get college sports back to where we want it to be. And we can discuss just how important it would be for Syracuse athletics if this bill goes forward, if it passes, if it becomes legitimate legislation that could police what is going on in the wild, wild west of college athletics. And just how much has this NIL era, transfer portal era, changed the way we think of Syracuse sports, changed the way we think of college sports overall, and how much would getting back to some semblance of what it was like before help Syracuse athletics. We'll discuss that today as we roll along on Drive Time. We're taking your phone calls, of course, here with you for the next hour at 315-437-7644. You can call in for ESPN 44 if you'd like to give us a ring. You can watch the show on QSportsTalk.com. You can watch the show on our Q Sports Talk YouTube page as well. You can comment in our live chat on both of those platforms, and I will be answering your questions during our Q Sports Talk break on YouTube and Twitch. And you can just have fun with our live chat as we continue here on Drive Time for the next hour. I also want to get into how it kind of hit me today that 2027 for Syracuse football, not this upcoming year, but the year after that, the year that they are starting with a game in Toronto and playing Wake Forest, and we discussed that, sort of hit me today. That 2027 team could maybe, I'm sort of scared to say this, but maybe be a college football playoff team, considering that the 24-team playoff could be happening. And we can discuss why, when you look into what to make of this year's Syracuse football team and what to make of next year's Syracuse football team, it's kind of fascinating to think about 2027 and start to look ahead a little bit and think about how successful Fran Brown could be in year 4 if they get back on track and put together a solid year 3. So maybe I'll explore what that is all about as we continue on Drive Time. Some interesting information in an article that came out today via thestate.com on a school that I would consider a peer to Syracuse basketball in the ACC, and what they spent on their roster last year and what they are spending on their roster this year, and how much they had to go up to be comparable to what they were last year. Some good intel on basically where things are at from a roster budget perspective in college basketball and specifically in the ACC. So we'll dive into that as we progress on Drive Time this afternoon. That is all ahead, plus your comments via the phone lines at 315-437-7644, or your comments via the Q Sports Talk chat or our Q Sports Talk YouTube chat. We begin today, though, with our Burdick BMW of Cicero and Burdick Toyota opening drive, as we always do. And we begin talking about the Protect College Sports Act bill. Very fun stuff. The Protect College Sports Act bill from the Senate was put forward. It was introduced today. And you're probably wondering, well, Tim, what do I need to know about this? First things first, it's probably unlikely to pass, honestly, as it is currently constructed. And this is not the first attempt. It probably won't be the last attempt at trying to give some guardrails to college athletics. This strikes me as a bill, bipartisan bill. Senators Ted Cruz and Maria Cantwell are the headliners of it. It is a bipartisan bill that is trying to fix everything at once with college athletics. And they have a lot of different rules and regulations and changes in this bill that they lay out. Probably the most important thing is a salary cap. They are very hard and fast in the language on how the College Sports Commission, which has been an utter failure, basically, and we knew it was probably going to be a failure. I mean, that was the most predictable thing ever, that thing was going to peter out or not be as iron fist as they were hoping when it was put into place. It sort of lays out how that needs to have a little bit more oomph to it. A salary cap is needed. It lays out that every single undergraduate college athlete should be allowed to transfer once without sitting out. And then if they transfer a second time, they will have to sit out a year. So that will put the transfer portal stuff a little bit more into a spot where we were used to pre the transfer portal era. There is some language in this bill to prevent a super league or the SEC and the Big Ten in football separating from the rest of college football and creating their own super league. Not sure the likelihood of this bill getting passed, considering that language is in here. There's also some stuff in here about everyone pooling the media rights for all of the major conferences in college football and making it a more even split. Not sure the SEC and Big Ten are going to love that, and not sure that as this bill currently stands, it's going to pass. But I'll say this, and I, like you listening right now, are probably pretty sick of hearing about bills and NIL and transfer portal and roster budget and money. And I miss the days of us dissecting a team and, you know, just talking about a team I just brought up. Maybe 2027 could be the year for college football or for Syracuse in college football. But I hesitate to say that because you really can't even look past 1 year anymore because the transfer portal is a thing. And if the year doesn't go well in 2026, all these hypothetical guys like a Demetrius Samuel and Antoine Delorier, these building blocks of your program, could get up and leave. They also could get up and leave if their year goes really well and an SEC school comes calling for them and Syracuse can't match that price. So these are all things that we're all tired of hearing about. And the reason I start the show today talking about this Protect College Sports Act is because this is really the most important thing you could be rooting for right now for Syracuse athletics to get back to where we all want it to be. As things stand right now in the NIL era, Syracuse football and basketball has been about a 500 team. Syracuse football in the 5 seasons, 2021 onward of NIL college football has gone 5-7 in 2021, 7-6 in 2022, 6-7 in 2023, 10-3, great year in 2024, year one of Fran Brown, 3-9 last year in year two of Fran Brown. You add all that up, Syracuse football is 31-32, a game below 500 in the last 5 years in the NIL era of college football. I think you know where I'm going with this, but Syracuse basketball, don't have to go through every single year like I did for football, but every year has been between 14 and 20 wins in the last 5 years. And it's probably no coincidence that the 5-year NCAA tournament drought for Syracuse basketball has coincided with 5 years of NIL being in place for college basketball. Syracuse is 82 and 80 overall in the last 5 years, just a little bit over 500. You add up Syracuse football and basketball together, and in 5 seasons now for each football and basketball, they are a 500 team, essentially at 113 wins and 112 losses combined for football and basketball. Projections for football this year are 5-5, or 5.5 wins and about a 500 football team. Projections for basketball, I think, are going to be slightly better than probably the average fan thinks, but they're not going to be projected to make the NCAA tournament, and that would be 6 straight years, and that would be all 6 years of the NIL era without Syracuse making the NCAA tournament. The biggest thing that NIL, transfer portal, wild, wild west of college sports has changed now that we have 5 years to look at the sample size and the data and really dig into it. The biggest thing it has changed is the ceiling of programs that are outside the top 20, top 25 in resources like Syracuse. Some programs, some athletic departments have greatly benefited from this era. Syracuse is not one of those, objectively. Syracuse is a fan base that has top 25 expectations for their basketball, football program because in the 80s they were that. In the 90s, they were that. And even basketball, obviously, going forward into the 2010s and onward, it was going great through the Big East glory days, for sure. So the fan base is expecting a winner, and it's become very clear in the last 5 years, and this isn't news to a lot of you listening, I get that, but it really hits you when you think about the last 5 years and where Syracuse basketball and Syracuse football is at in this new landscape of college sports. Granted, Syracuse football didn't do better. They actually did worse in the 5 years preceding these 5 years of NIL seasons. Syracuse basketball did a decent amount better, but that was before things fell off. And obviously, there's a lot of factors outside of just NIL. Their Hall of Fame head coach retiring is one example, or one very major factor, of course. But what we really should be focusing on is just desperately pleading for the Senate to come through here. And the way I look at the current bill that they have come forward with today, it feels like they're trying to fix everything at once. We just need to add a salary cap. We need to get some of this under control as quickly as possible. The hope is for Syracuse sports fans that in 20, 30 years from now, we look back on a Wikipedia page that lists all the records and all the individual seasons for Syracuse football and Syracuse basketball, and we say, yeah, those 5 years from 2021 to about 2026, or maybe it was 10 years before they come in with this Senate legislation and they get things back to normal. The hope is you look at a period of time and you say, that was the NIL era, and that's when things did not go well for Syracuse basketball. And they get back to normal because college sports gets back to normal, and the ceiling of Syracuse athletics is not limited. Because right now, the cold hard facts are resources matter more than they ever have. And as much as we talk about how excited we are about Brian Blair, the new AD, Mike Haney, the new chancellor, Jerry McNamara, the new men's basketball coach, a lot of us are very excited, of course, about Fran Brown, the football coach. All those things matter, but they're all kind of second fiddle to the idea of how much the Senate wrapping their hands around college sports and getting this back somewhat to normalcy would help Syracuse athletics. If you are a Syracuse sports fan right now, you should be rooting for this Protect College Sports Act bill to pass. Is it going to pass as it's currently constructed? Probably not. But gosh, can the Senate just figure things out? Because I am tired of talking about how much different things are. I'm tired of theorizing about roster budgets and NIL and transfer portal. To some extent, I don't think the viewership of college sports has necessarily gone down, but it's hurting a program or an athletic department like Syracuse. And the days of Syracuse winning ACC championships in basketball, which used to, obviously it never happened, but it used to be something you could theorize. I understand that if they get back to where, close to where they were, then the resources are going to grow and so on and so forth. But really what they need is the Senate to come in and regulate this thing and help Syracuse and other programs that have taken a step back and have objectively been hurt by the current landscape of college sports be in a better position to succeed. I think a salary cap is the most important thing. I think collective bargaining needs to happen. And honestly, it's frustrating that we're counting on the Senate for this because obviously it's not going to be very swift, and it hasn't been swift to this point. But at least today is a step in the right direction of another bill coming forward. And there is understanding at how important this needs to be. Everyone agrees, I think, that salary cap, a one-time transfer portal rule, there's stuff that we're all in agreement on, but we just haven't gotten it to the finish line. And I would love to see, for Syracuse sports' sake, and just for overall college sports, if some of this stuff gets to the finish line. We'll hit a timeout. Looks like we've got some callers. We'll get to you on the other side. We'll also talk about Syracuse football and why I think they have a sneaky good shot to make the college football playoff in 2027. Not next year, but the year after that. We'll discuss that next on Drive Time. What up, chat? Matt, I'm excited that you agree with me on, oh wait, Doug, I wholeheartedly disagree with you on your synopsis of Gate. Being undisciplined and poor fundamentals is directly related to coaching. Gary and Pat make absolutely no in-game adjustments. I love it. If you want to call in, Doug, feel free. We can hash this out. I would say to that, if you listened, I said the undisciplined play is something that I think is totally fair to critique. I get frustrated when people bring up the turnovers because if you watch other college lacrosse games, they are actually in a good spot in terms of turnovers per game. They're in top 10 nationally year in and year out there. So I just get frustrated when fans are saying fire Gate, hire Lars Tiffany, because Lars Tiffany's team was incredibly poor in terms of offsides called, turnovers, clearing, etc. And I think, frankly, the standard of some of the fans is so high that no matter who would be the head coach, they would be frustrated. And those fans are the vocal ones, and it's annoying to see that also those fans probably are uneducated on where Syracuse actually sits or how they compare to other teams in the country. I'm not saying Gary Gate is like an unbelievable coach by any means, but I think right now, given his track record, there's no reason to be upset with him. And I do think they make good in-game adjustments. They were down at the half in the first round. In the second round, they won both those games. I think you're not watching if you think they make no in-game adjustments. Coach O goes zone at the end of the game against UNC. They win the game. UNC had 28 scholarships this year. Syracuse had 12.6. They still beat them. Let's see what's going on in the Twitch chat. Yeah, I mean, next year, can they make it to the quarterfinals? Lacrosse? I don't know. It's going to be tough. I would say for Syracuse's sake, Tronic, you would like the next era to bear some resemblance to pre-NIL. This era is not good for Syracuse, is all I'm saying. What's up, Super Cat? Doug, I would just say, and I don't know exactly where you stand, but I might be grouping you in with like the average fan who just expects Syracuse. They assume Syracuse is the most talented team in the country. My frustration is with some of the fans that seem hyper-focused on Syracuse, but they're not really paying attention to the rest of college lacrosse. And I think they're expecting Syracuse to play a really clean game of lacrosse that no one is playing in the country. In the late 80s, Coach Simmons was called undisciplined with a running gun, behind the back passes. Gates made popular. Coos doesn't play lacrosse. Like, yeah, that's a totally fair point, Craig. And that's part of the fabric of the program, for sure. We've hit on that. Gate also deserves some credit for getting the women's team to the Final Four year in and year out. And you got to understand it's tough to break through. But I'm sure you do realize that, Joe. We roll along on Drive Time, Wednesday afternoon, talking bills and laws and NIL and just typical college sports summer nonsense here as we welcome you back in. Tim Leonard with you. We go to our phone lines for the first time this afternoon. If you'd like to call in, you can do so at 315-437-7644. We go to DJ in Cicero, who's been waiting patiently. What's up, DJ?
Hey, so ever since the NIL, it's totally ruined college sports. So for the last few years, I used to watch college basketball, football all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. Now, honestly, I don't even waste my time. I do not waste my time no more watching it because to me it's just a bunch of bratty kids getting these millions and millions of dollars just to turn around and go and leave the school after they get paid. I think there should be a mandatory at least, say, 2 to 4 years, and then you'll get your money. If you don't, then that's on you.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm hoping for contracts and a salary cap, and as I laid out in the first segment, they need some of those guardrails to come into place. I think that would help Syracuse, and I'm sure DJ still watches Syracuse closely because I hear from him every now and again on this show. And I understand that I think even my consumption of overall college football, overall college basketball has gone down. Maybe that's partially because I get paid to watch Syracuse and I have to watch everything and cover everything with Syracuse. And sometimes I don't feel like I have the time to digest the Saturday college football experience as much because I'm working the Syracuse game every Saturday. But I digress a little bit. On the key point of needing contracts, needing all those things to try and kind of gather this thing back to where it was before, we got some comments on our Q Sports Talk chat. College sports is never going to go back to where it was before. No, probably not. I mean, to some extent, yes, the toothpaste is out of the tube. These guys are going to be making a lot of money to play high-level Division I athletics in college football and college basketball for the foreseeable future. No doubt about that. And I think we're mostly in agreement. Most of us were in agreement that NIL has some value and it was needed. I don't think that the amount that college athletics departments were making off of these kids and they weren't making money was right. Now we have gotten out of whack where the numbers continue to climb, and they're only going to get higher and higher. We're seeing that year over year. We keep thinking there's no way it goes higher than this, and it does. There's no way someone pays this buyout for a college football coach, and it does. I said 4 or 5 years ago, Coleman Hawkins signs at Kansas State. He was a $2 million deal. It blew our minds. Now, Brad Brownell, quoted today talking about Clemson, says, it's amazing how many $2 million and $3 million players are out there. You guys might think the Syracuse basketball roster is underwhelming. There's probably some of you that are listening right now or watching us right now that have that take. And it's amazing how much they spent on their roster. I don't know exactly, but I do know that they have multiple $1 million players because that's just common sense based on what the market price is. And any starter seems to be making $1 million plus to play power conference college basketball next year. And then you get into a guy like Donnie Freeman, who the Syracuse fan base didn't really like and was underwhelmed by his 2 years here, is now set to make north of $3.5 billion, are the reports, to play for St. John's next year. Someone like Daryl Gill, Syracuse wide receiver, I saw The Athletic puts out a post today, top 100 college football players going into 2026, and Daryl Gill is listed as the 89th best player. That surprised me, and that's a classic example of there's no shot that he would crack the top 100 if he was still playing at Syracuse, but he gets a bump in those rankings now that he's in the SEC, and now he's considered an SEC wide receiver for a top program like Ole Miss. Regardless, I'm sure he is making $1 million or more, maybe even in the multi-million-dollar range to be a wide receiver for an SEC school and one of their top wide receivers next year. So the numbers are crazy. It's gotten out of hand. I feel right now Syracuse is in a very good spot with their coaches. I think Fran Brown and Jerry McNamara are old school in the sense that they are going to bring in guys and build a culture and try to keep guys. And I think they will be relatively good at retaining those players, which gets me to my next point I wanted to discuss. And I teased this off the top. I was thinking today, after Max Chadwick, who came on to Orange Nation, had an interesting comment. Max was asked straight up by Stephen Pauly, and he is a college football reporter and writer and podcaster. And Max was asked straight up, how big is year 3 for Fran Brown? And he said, I don't think it's a make or break year this year. I think he'll keep his job regardless of what happens, unless everything falls apart. But next year could be in line for a make or break year if they are just okay or somewhat disappointing this year, to paraphrase Max a little bit. And you look at the Syracuse football roster and where it is right now. And we talked about a lot last year. Wow, this is a really, really young roster. And there are a lot of young guys that are getting valuable time that could help them down the road. I would ask all of you listening and watching right now, rack your brain as you think about the Syracuse football potential depth chart, who their stars are, who are the best players on the roster we think going into 2026. And then ask yourself, who of those players is out of eligibility in college football after just this next year in 2026? When you really go through Syracuse football's depth chart, there's not a lot of seniors on it. There's not a lot of guys that have one more year of eligibility. The entire quarterback room, including Steve Angeli, could come back in 2027. The entire running back room. Essentially the entire wide receiver room, outside of Umari Hatcher, who didn't really play last year and we're expecting to be healthier and better this year. Their tight end room essentially could all come back. There's like one offensive lineman that is out of eligibility that we expect to start this year, and the transfer in Akinchilo. There's some defensive linemen for sure because they kind of went more veteran on the defensive line and the edge rushers because they needed to. Linebacker Gary Bryant is a name that will be out of eligibility after this year. But think about the core of guys that could be returning and have multiple years of eligibility as Syracuse goes into 2027. And also think about that could be a 24-team playoff year. It seems we're heading that way. Steve Angeli, your entire quarterback room back if they want to. And if things go okay in 2026 and the bottom doesn't fall out and you can convince them we're building a culture and retain these guys, Angeli, your quarterback room, your running back room, your wide receiver room, pretty much all back. Demetrius Samuel, Antoine Delorier could be studs in their junior season returning to Syracuse. Calvin Russell, who of course is maybe or maybe not going to play this year for Syracuse football, but regardless, he is a 5-star wide receiver that should be, and we hope to be, healthy next year. Now, some of you are stopping me and probably saying, well, this is all great, but Demetrius Samuel's probably going to get swooped up and taken by an SEC school. Calvin Russell, that might happen. Who says Steve Angeli's coming back? What if this year goes poorly? I get that I'm connecting dots and I'm kind of just jumping to conclusions. But if Fran Brown year 4 is a make or break year, and we talk about how it's tough for Syracuse football to succeed in the NIL era, and you almost just need one of those years where the stars align, which I think they definitely got in year 1 under Fran Brown because they had transfer portal guys, they had returners, they had a lot of hype, a lot of buzz, pretty good schedule. The stars aligned. 2027, not this upcoming year, but the year after, really has the makings right now of a year where the stars could align for Syracuse football. They open the season against Wake Forest in Toronto. Then week 2, they're at Penn State. Who knows what their ACC schedule is? But if you have Steve Angeli in his final year of eligibility, if you have Calvin Russell healthy, if you have Demetrius Samuel, Antoine Delorier, you have all these guys that have gotten better and better and have played a lot of college football. And now you're looking at a core group that is more upperclassmen. And you're looking at a 2014 playoff potentially, which means you might just have to be top 3 or 4 in the ACC to make it. I don't know. It's kind of intriguing when you think about 2 years from now. But the frustrating thing is it's almost foolish to do that until 2026 happens. And in order for the stars to align and everything to stay on track, 2026 has to be a solid year at bare minimum. It can't be a year where they win 3 games again, or else, frankly, Steve Angeli and all these guys we're talking about might take their talents elsewhere. But you got a good recruiting class in 2027, the makings of it early. You've got, I think we all agree, is a really good defensive coordinator right now. We're excited about it. It could be year 2 of a new defense. That's exciting. A lot of returning pieces on defense, maybe. That would be nice. So it just got me thinking today that maybe we're not talking enough about how if this 2014 playoff happens, Syracuse could be, if the stars continue to align, if we stay on this track, they could be in pretty good positioning to strike in that first year, potentially, of a 2014 playoff. We'll take a timeout. We'll come back and discuss some roster budget information on a peer school in the ACC as it pertains to men's basketball, where that school stands and how they could be kind of a blueprint for Syracuse men's basketball. That's next.
Did you miss Drive Time with Tim?
Tim Smith's drinking the playoff Kool-Aid as well. If Syracuse wins 8, yeah, but also, like, if they win 8 and they have to pony up and keep Fran, I mean, you're talking about pony up. I probably use that phrase too much, but you're talking about a lot of urgency to keep him if things are going well, considering a Super League could be around the corner. New AD Brian Blair, I don't think he wants to let him go in like his first or second year. I mean, I think they're in pretty good spot if this year doesn't go like unbelievably well. I understand the whole, like, if Florida comes calling, which they're not because they already hired, or, you know, if an SEC school comes calling, they probably can't compete. But, I mean, it just feels like Syracuse would do all it could, more so than maybe normal. Now, is that enough? I don't know. Yeah, bowling ball. That's kind of what we were talking about in the first segment. And I don't want to be the guy that's saying again for the second straight year, like if football struggles again this year, it's going to be tough. And I don't really want to get on here and be like, look at how young they are and look at how much better they could be. But I do think they were super young last year and they're still young this year. And it's almost like you have to get old, or if Syracuse is going to succeed, kind of like the conversation we were having with lacrosse, their advantage was experience. It wasn't scholarships. It wasn't five-star talent. It was, we've got a group that's been there before in the Final Four, and they're going in and they've played in a ton of big games. It's almost like Syracuse football has to follow that model, which is really tough to follow. And that's why Fran's recruiting more from the high school ranks. And you notice, like, who did he bring in the transfer portal? Guys with multiple years of eligibility. Who did Jerry McNamara bring in the transfer portal? Multiple years of eligibility. Yeah, as Wildtech said a ton of times, if the Super League is 50, you like our chances. If it's 40, maybe. If it's 30, probably not. Doug Spry kind of went away after I commented back about his gate needs to go, basically, or it's all coaching with Syracuse. Just looking forward to a healthy convo. Doug, where'd you go? And obviously, Angeli getting hurt stunk, but him getting a 2027 year out of it could be a nice consolation if all goes according to plan here. Hoping to get a Renze, yes. We should have him soon. Welcome back into Drive Time. 315-437-7644 if you want to chime in this afternoon. For ESPN 44 is the phone number to call. You can always watch our shows on QSportsTalk.com. If you're on the go, pull it up on your phone, tablet, computer. You can watch, you can live chat. I'll answer your questions in our Q Sports Talk breaks on Twitch and YouTube. YouTube page is Q Sports Talk as well. We'll get into the Yankees some later on when we do our Yankees update. Always brought to you by the Wildcat Sports Pub in Camillus. But right now, I want to talk about an interesting article I read today as it pertains to Clemson men's basketball and their roster budget. Some good reporting, some good intel, some good quotes from Brad Brownell on where they were at last year, roster budget-wise, and where they are at this year, and how they went into this offseason and the number they had in mind had to change pretty dramatically for them to stay competitive relative to last year in college basketball. And keep all this in mind through the lens of Syracuse as I go through the Clemson numbers that were reported today in this article from thestate.com. Some of the reporting also through Tiger Illustrated. Also, keep in mind that when we had Eric Devendorf on Orange Nation, shortly after kind of the roster and the transfer portal was sort of wrapping up, we asked him about the roster, and he, unprompted, before any of this type of news, said, it kind of reminds me of Clemson. Like, could they build something like a Clemson that has retained players and they've got a good overall balance of skills and they've got a roster that is maybe greater than the sum of its parts, and they've won a lot of games with a good coach in Brad Brownell? We did discuss on Orange Nation in the last couple of days that maybe somewhat surprisingly, Brad Brownell is getting paid a head coaching salary that is at the very top of the ACC, and we know Adrian Autry is getting paid or was getting paid a head coaching salary that is near the bottom of the ACC. We don't know, of course, being a private institution, where Jerry McNamara is at right now, but I think we can confidently say Clemson spends more on their head coaching position than Syracuse. As for their basketball roster budget, this article says that last year Clemson was at $6 million all in on their roster budget or thereabouts. Only $2 million came from revenue share budget. So rev share plus NIL was $6 million. $2 million from your rev share is below what the average split or the publicly put out there split has been. The working theory, the working benchmark, when we get into the revenue share discussion, is typically 75% of your about $21 million goes to football and 15% goes to men's basketball. Clemson being at around $2 million would have put them last year at about 11%. Now, Clemson, unlike Syracuse, is a football-minded school. Clemson spent 86% of their rev share budget, according to these reports, on football last year. About 15 or 16 mil. I think it was more than 15 mil of their rev share, 21 or so mil went to football. So only 2 mil from rev share went to basketball. The rest, about 4 mil to get their total budget last year of 6 mil, was through NIL third-party donations. Syracuse, we believe, was above that last year. Not by a ton, but probably in the neighborhood of $7.5 million. John Wildsack, I think, said about $7.5 mil or just below $8 mil was about their roster budget last year. That's pretty consistent with what you hear and the reporting that I have, etc. So Syracuse was probably ahead of Clemson by a little bit last year. Now, if Syracuse is truly a top 6 team in the ACC or top 3rd in the ACC in men's basketball NIL, then they definitely have to be ahead of Clemson. Clemson is a football-minded school that is going to put, as evidence of last year, a lot of their resources towards football. Here's where it gets interesting, though. Brad Brownell, quoted in this article, says they had a meeting, him and his AD, Graham Neff, I believe is his name, had a meeting right at the start of the offseason, and the original offseason meeting number that they came up with was, quote, maybe a little more than last year, Brownell recalled. But we quickly realized that wasn't even going to be close, Brownell told the State during ACC spring meetings. So Clemson upped its financial commitment for men's basketball and quickly saw the results, this article says. Tiger Illustrated is reporting that Clemson's financial commitment this year to men's basketball is approaching $10 million. That would be roughly a 66% increase from last year's reported total. So Clemson went into this offseason, thought they had a number that was a little bit more than $6 million that was going to be about what they need. And Brad Brownell saying the market went crazy. Brownell, Clemson's longtime coach, who admitted last year that his program's smaller revenue sharing cut relative to other basketball programs would be a, quote, challenge, credited Neff and the administration for adjusting after acknowledging that the college basketball player payment market was, quote, going crazy in 2026. Even Brownell said this year's Clemson team is probably in a similar spot as last year's team in terms of outside expectations. But, quote, we have spent more money because the markets demanded it, right? Brownell said. It's going crazy. The amount of guys getting $2 million and $3 million is remarkable, Brownell went on to say. I think it's fair to say Syracuse, to anyone that thinks, where is the NIL increase I was promised with Jerry McNamara? I thought he was going to be good for NIL. Stop thinking that if that's what you think, because he is good for NIL. There has been an NIL increase. So we can almost confidently say as good of a fact that Syracuse has increased from last year and where they were at around $8 million. And Brian Blair has said as much as well. And if you believe in Brian Blair, which you should, all his comments indicate that Syracuse is not in a tough spot in the NIL space. Now, granted, the athletic director is always going to present the spot that they are in from an NIL standpoint in as good of a light as possible. I'm just confused, as I've said on this show, that last year's NIL budget was in a very good spot, according to the fans, and there was a lot of chatter about stop blaming NIL, we have the talent. And this year's budget, which I think is probably, don't know for sure, and if I ever find out for sure, I'll let you guys know. I think it's probably pretty comparable to where Clemson is at. Clemson saying about $10 million. Feels like Syracuse is in that neighborhood. They might even be a little bit higher. I mean, I'm not sure. I know that they were ahead of Clemson last year based on this reporting. Are they still ahead of them? I don't know, but I think it's fair to say Clemson's swimming in the same waters last year. Syracuse is swimming in the same waters as Syracuse this year from a roster budget standpoint. Clemson's outside expectations were solid last year. They're going to be solid this year. Actually, it seems like there are some people that are very high on Clemson's roster, and with the budget they had and the culture they have and the coach they had, they seem to maximize it pretty well. They brought in a top scorer in the portal. I mean, they're looking pretty similar to Syracuse from a transfer portal class, but the difference is they retained every player they could but one. Syracuse, obviously, coaching change makes it different for player retention. So Clemson's expectations after going up pretty considerably in NIL are going to be about the same. Syracuse's expectations have gone out of whack after they probably have gone up solidly in NIL and are probably swimming in the same waters as Clemson and those type of schools in men's basketball in the ACC. It just feels like the fan base got swept up in the momentum of Jerry McNamara being named to the head coach. And the momentum of Syracuse is going to be back. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And the idea that some of these other ACC schools with really big pockets were able to flip things very quickly. Louisville, Virginia, etc. had very good year ones. Miami, etc. had very good year ones in the ACC under a first-year head coach. But what we have to keep in mind is Syracuse is probably not swimming in the waters of Virginia, Louisville, Miami. Syracuse is probably swimming in the waters more of a Clemson. Clemson is probably more of the blueprint. That might frustrate people, but Clemson's paying their head coach a whole lot more than probably what Jerry McNamara is getting paid, is what our assumption is right now. I understand Clemson's football-minded, Syracuse is basketball-minded. I do think that Syracuse is given a whole lot more from their rev share pie to basketball than certainly what Clemson gave last year. So how they're getting to that number might be different, but the overall number is probably in the same ballpark. And it's kind of interesting, the messaging. The messaging from Syracuse, it feels underwhelming what this roster is, because there was an expectation and there was some momentum. Top third in the ACC, this could be a huge transfer portal for GMAC. And I have said, hand up, I thought going in the transfer portal cycle, they would land more of a quote-unquote star than they got. If you would have told me on whatever it is, April 7th or April 1st or around there when the transfer portal was kind of first getting going, here is their roster that they put together, and you would have showed me that roster on April 1st, I would have been underwhelmed. No denying that. I think myself included, I was swept up in the momentum. I think we all got a little bit swept up in it. But now it's become too far one way where we are seeing a roster that is really pretty comparable to what the talent level was last year. And because of expectations, we're down on this year's roster. When last year's roster was a lot better than 2 years ago, that made us think, wow, this is a really talented roster. But relative to last year shapes our opinion. So because 2024 was a lousy roster, that made us think 2025 was really talented. Because 2025 in our head was really talented, this is making 2026 not look as good when it's really pretty similar to 2025 from a talent and preseason rankings lens. We'll hit our final timeout. We'll do some shout-outs on the other side. You're listening to Drive Time. No, they didn't do much. Clemson was $6 million all in. Yes, Doug. Doug, you're back. You didn't answer my lacrosse question or lacrosse takes, though. You kind of just dropped your take and left. If Clemson was all in at $6 million, that is remarkable. What is Clemson's record the last 5 years in the NIL era? If Syracuse was 500 and Clemson was spending the same, that is a big problem. I don't think that I think they were ahead of Syracuse for sure when it was just NIL. Rev share has allowed Syracuse to catch up because they're not going to give a ton from a rev share pie to basketball, probably, as evidence of, I'm guessing Syracuse was in like the $4.5 million range from their rev share last year out of their $7.5 million. So Clemson, much better at getting third-party donations. When it was all third-party donations, they were doing probably much better than Syracuse. They also were trending fine going into the NIL era. Syracuse was trending down. Now, their football has been very underwhelming in the NIL era, in the transfer portal era, because their head coach doesn't really subscribe to the transfer portal as much as other coaches maybe. Clemson's record is 1-14-44. Either Syracuse has really bad coaching or they brought in terrible players and overpaid. Yeah, I think you're jumping to conclusions if you're saying the last 5 years Clemson was level with Syracuse. Clemson was probably ahead of Syracuse until the rev share year this past, definitely ahead of Syracuse, because Syracuse's overall budget 2 years ago was like $2.5 million. And we know that ranked near the bottom of the ACC. Then they jumped to about $8 million because pretty much all of the NIL, all of the gap there was filled by rev share, probably. So rev share has helped them get to a better spot. And this past year, they were probably middle of the pack and okay. And they were more than Clemson based on this reporting. So if you want to quibble with why didn't they win more games than Clemson last year, that makes perfect sense. And that's totally fair. And that's why Red got fired. And we talked about they had the talent to make the tournament last year, but they didn't. Thanks, Doug. I'm glad we got to a conclusion there. Let's see what I'm missing in the Twitch chat. Yeah, where are jetpacks and flying cars? Yeah, I was probably did have to use the dump button. That was so funny because I was like, no, I didn't curse. Because I said effing and bleeped that part out, but it just slipped my mind reading the tweet that there was another curse word in there. That was hilarious. To answer your question, San Diego Keys, I'm hoping that we'll have about one assistant coach on per week. We have not had Ben Lee. We have not had Greg Fahey. I kind of want to get the new guys in a way. I'm sure we'll get a Renze on. I would like to get them all on this week if I could, but, the school is probably not going to do that. So I think Pete Corsinini will try and get on when the schedule is kind of all out there, and he can explain that in better detail. Definitely fair, Doug, to conclude that Clemson was getting more out of their roster budget in general than most teams, though, and say, wow, Brad Brownell is a pretty good coach.
Talk.com.
All right, welcome back into Drive Time. Final segment this afternoon on a Wednesday afternoon in CNY. We're going to do some shout outs before we get out of here. Shout out first to Cayenne Anthony. He has posted on Twitter and on social media that he is up to 195 pounds. Carmelo Anthony talking about him in the past couple days on the All the Smoke podcast says he is up 10 pounds from last year to 195 already. Listed at 185 on the Syracuse roster. So we talked about what does Cayenne need to do in the offseason. He's got to get in the gym. He's got to add some weight. And it appears he has done that. He is posting he's 195 from 172, which I think he's getting at. He was 172 maybe going into Q, or maybe high school time period, because at least the website listed him at 185. That might be a little generous last year, but regardless, he is now 195 according to his dad Mello in his post on social media, and Cayenne gaining weight is a good thing, certainly for his chances of taking a leap in his sophomore year. Shout out to the Vegas Golden Knights and our guy Dan Duva, who is the former play-by-play man for the Syracuse Crunch. You probably heard him on these airwaves a ton. And Dan Duva now is the play-by-play man for the Vegas Golden Knights. We had him on Orange Nation before that series got going, and I think he was sort of cautiously thinking maybe they will fizzle out and lose this series. They swept Colorado. No one really saw that coming. Underdogs in the series. They're going to the Stanley Cup final for the third time in the first 9 years of their franchise, and they will await the winner of the Canadiens and the Canes. Shout out to the Yankees. Our Yankees update always brought to you by the Wildcat Sports Pub in Camillus. Wildcat Wednesday tonight. They also have a lunch deal throughout this week where you can get 2 large slices of cheese pizza and a soda for just $6. Great lunch deal at the Wildcat Sports Pub in Camillus, one of my favorite spots. And our Yankees update, the Yanks thrashed the Royals last night 15-1. They just dominate the Royals. They've beaten them 12 straight times. 24 hits last night. It was the first time in Yankees franchise history that every single player in their starting lineup, 1 through 9 in the batting order, had at least 2 hits in the game. That's never happened in the storied history of the Yankees. It happened last night for the first time. It was their most hits, 24 of them in a road game since the 1970s. Their most hits in a game period since 2011 against the Orioles in July. Shout out to game times being announced. The Syracuse football start of the season game times are out there. New Hampshire, week 1 is a nooner on ACC Network, kind of as expected. That's a home game. Then they're hosting Cal, week 2. A Cal team that is probably going to be sneaky good. That's a 3:30 start on ACC Network. Then they play their only weeknight game, which, again, you're kind of more inclined to have some weeknight games based on the TV ratings helping you out revenue-wise now. Their only weeknight game is a Thursday, September 17th game at Pittsburgh, 7:30 start on ESPN. That will overlap with the Bills playing on that Thursday night. And then the October 3rd game against UConn is a noon start on CBS Sports Network. Shout out to Finn Thompson as well. He was named to the All-Tournament team, and now he's getting some PLL consideration, as he should. had some highlight reel plays at the Combine for the PLL this week. Tewaaraton ceremony, by the way, tomorrow night, and Joey Spallina may be, depending on how you view it, still considered the favorite for that award. So we'll have that to discuss as the week progresses on Drive Time. Shout out to Paul for producing as well, and shout out to all of you for listening and watching. We'll talk to you tomorrow on ESPN Radio and QSportsTalk.com.
This is our...